The banquet hall was filled with light. Bouquets of white peonies, which had turned cream in color, were neatly arranged on each table like arms outstretched to welcome happiness. The guests chattered, the clinking of glasses mixed with the soft music. Everything exuded a false sense of peace, like a velvet curtain hiding something that was about to explode. In the midst of that seemingly perfect scene, Margaret, the powerful woman of the family, the groom's mother, stood up. She didn't need to tap her spoon on her glasses, nor did she need to raise her voice. Just standing up with a cold look was enough to stop all the laughter. She looked straight at her son Luke, then glanced at Emma, the girl sitting next to her, wearing a simple but dignified white dress. There was no acceptance in her eyes, and then her voice rang out slow and cold. "If you marry him, don't ever call me mother." For a moment, the world seemed to stop. The laughter stopped. The knives and forks stopped in midair. The guests' eyes darted back and forth, both curious and embarrassed. Luke was stunned, his face as if someone had slapped him. Emma's face paled, her hand unconsciously clutching the hem of her dress. Beside her, Noah, a 7-year-old boy, held onto his mother's hand, his round eyes blazing with fear. The air froze. Those words were like a knife tearing apart the fake curtain, revealing the truth. This was not a happy wedding. This was a battlefield. 24 hours ago, no one would have thought that this tragedy would happen. Emma stared at the large mirror in her small apartment. The white veil draped over her shoulders. The morning sunlight shining through the window made her look like a beautiful and fragile young lady. Her fingers trembled as she adjusted the folds of her dress, as if just the dress was smooth, all the chaos in her life would automatically straighten itself. "This time it has to be different," Emma whispered, as if praying. The door to the room opened and Noah appeared. The boy had messy brown hair, red cheeks, and was holding a piece of paper tightly in his arms. He ran happily to his mother. "Mom, look, I drew a family." Emma bent down, smiling as she looked at the drawing, a man, a woman, and a little boy holding hands inside a bright red heart. The drawing was innocent but made her heart ache. Noah raised his head, his eyes clear and full of hope. "Does Grandma like me?" "Mom," Emma was stunned. The seemingly simple question was like a knife piercing an unhealed wound. She hugged her child, tried to smile, her voice choked. "She will if we give her time." Meanwhile, Luke stood in front of the bathroom mirror, tying his tie. The white light fell on his face, reflecting the barely concealed tension. He remembered the many arguments with his mother about Emma. Margaret always said, "You can choose anyone, but not a woman who has been broken, and who also has a child." Luke knew that to his mother, Emma was more than just a bride. She was a reminder that he was breaking the family's unwritten rules. Marriage must be perfect, without blemish. In Noah and Margaret's eyes was living proof of Emma's failure. He took a deep breath, telling himself, if only tonight would go smoothly, everything would be fine. But his heart did not believe in that promise. Margaret, in her room, stood in front of the old wooden cabinet, carefully choosing a pearl necklace. She looked at herself in the mirror, smoothed her skirt, looking perfect like a model lady. But behind those eyes were unforgettable memories. Many years ago, Margaret was betrayed by her own husband. He had an affair, leaving an indelible stain in her heart. Even though he later returned and asked for forgiveness, she never forgot that humiliation. And now, when she looked at Emma, a divorced woman with a child, she only saw the image of the third party from back then. In her eyes, Emma was a threat to the family's reputation and purity. She didn't care how much Emma loved her son or how much Luke loved Emma. She only saw a stain that was about to be imprinted on the family line. Margaret put on her bracelet, her lips curled slightly. If we don't stop it from the beginning, this stain will spread. When Emma and Noah entered the house, the atmosphere in the living room immediately changed. A few relatives stood up to greet them, smiling awkwardly. Noah timidly leaned close to his mother. Margaret stepped out, her smile as thin as a razor. "Hello, Emma." Her voice was polite but cold. Emma tried to respond, "Hello, ma'am, thanks for inviting me." Margaret glanced at Noah, no smile, no greeting, just a casual nod. Emma felt like someone had just slammed the door in her child's face. Luke's backyard was bright in the sunset. A long table was covered with a white tablecloth, steaming dishes on it, vases of pure white peonies. Guests sat around, polite smiles on their faces. Emma sat next to Luke, Noah nestled between them. The boy was eager, his eyes shining as he held the drawing tightly in his hands. Aunt May, Margaret's younger sister, a kind woman with a warm smile, leaned down. "What are you drawing, honey?" Noah happily handed over the drawing, a family, Mom, Luke, and Grandma. There was a pause. Margaret glanced over, her face expressionless. She just hemmed and turned away as if the drawing was just a smudge on paper. Noah, bewildered, lowered the drawing. Emma quickly patted her son's head, her heart feeling like it was being squeezed. Just a hem, but it was enough to destroy the little warmth left on the table. Dinner began. The table was set perfectly, grilled meat, salad, red wine. But amid the beauty, tension was evident. People talked about the weather, baseball, work, boring stories to fill the void. Emma sat, trying to smile, but her heart was pounding. Every time Margaret spoke, she felt the whole table's eyes on her, waiting for a mistake. Noah was silent, his big eyes watching. Luke held the air, constantly interjecting, trying to steer the conversation. But every time, Margaret only needed one word, one look to pull everyone back into tension. Aunt May, sitting opposite, occasionally tried to make jokes to relieve the pressure. She told about the flower garden behind the house, about the new cat. Everyone laughed faintly, but then fell silent again. Aunt May looked at Emma, her eyes full of sympathy, as if to say, "Keep it up, my dear." Emma took a sip of water, her heart bitter. She remembered the meals in her old marriage, meals where silence was also thick, where she was judged by looks, where every small mistake was magnified into a sin. And now that past was resurfacing. The only difference was that this time, Noah was sitting here suffering with her. The atmosphere continued to be heavy. When Uncle Bob raised his glass, "To new beginnings," everyone awkwardly clinked glasses, but Margaret, as if on purpose, put her glass down, looking straight at Emma. "Some people carry baggage. I only hope my son understands the weight." The atmosphere seemed frozen. The dishes were still steaming, but no one touched their chopsticks. Eyes avoided. Emma pursed her lips, trying to keep calm. "We all carry something. It's what we do with it that matters." Margaret curled her lips. "Do we?" The table fell silent. Knives and forks stopped. And the atmosphere became thick, as if just a spark could explode. The atmosphere at the dining table was like a stretched string. The forced laughter had stopped, replaced by a stifling silence. The clock on the wall in the dining room broke. But as soon as she said it, Emma knew it was just a lie to soothe. Time would never be enough to thaw Margaret's cold heart. In another house, the atmosphere was equally tense. Luke sat in the living room, his white shirt neat, his eyes fixed on an old photo, him, Margaret, and his now-deceased father. Memories flooded back. This house had once echoed with his father's laughter, had once been warm with evening gatherings. But since his death, the house had become a fortress of harsh rules. In Luke's mind, the word family was always associated with unwritten rules. The tablecloth had to be pressed, the dishes neatly arranged, the smiles at the right times. Any wrinkles were considered an insult, and Margaret, his mother, was the strictest guard. Flowers arrived. Her voice rang out, steady but more commanding than questioning. Luke looked up. Margaret stood in the doorway, her figure straight, her hair tightly rolled, her eyes sharp as knives. "Yes, white peonies, Emma's favorite." Luke answered briefly. Margaret paused for a moment. A faint smile flashed. "A second wedding never shines as bright as the first, but at least we can keep it tasteful." The words were spoken calmly, but to Luke each word was a knife. He swallowed, not arguing. He had tried to stand up for himself many times, but in this house all his efforts had failed under his mother's control. And now he feared that Emma and Noah would suffer the same fate. Emma was still trying on wedding dresses at a small shop. The large mirror reflected the image of a breathtakingly beautiful bride, but her eyes were covered in a layer of worry. The shopkeeper praised her. Emma only forced a smile. The phone in her pocket vibrated. A text from Luke. "Dinner at 7, my family." Emma clenched her phone, took a deep breath. Dinner with my husband's family, 3 simple words, but to her it was like a sentence. Emma sat in the car on the way to Luke's house. The simple dress hugged her body, but her mind was restless. Through the window, the gentle American sunset passed by, suburban houses close together, children playing in the yard, families gathered around the dinner table. Emma sighed. Outsiders would think she was lucky. A successful man loved her, a beautiful wedding was coming. But only she knew stepping into Margaret's house was like stepping into forbidden territory. Noah sat in the back seat, fondling the drawing, his eyes shining. "Mom, do you like us?" he asked again, unable to hide his excitement. Emma turned around, trying to smile. "You will understand that I am a part of us." But in her heart, she thought, Margaret will never accept. Tea made a tick, sound so clear that everyone could hear it. Emma sat there trying to keep her composure, but her heart was in turmoil. Every glance from Margaret was like a sharp knife. She felt everyone at the table, relatives, guests looking at her as if waiting for her to make a mistake. Luke sat next to her, his hand gently placed on her thigh, but it was shaking. He wanted to reassure her, but he himself did not believe that tonight would be a good night. Noah did not understand. He sat upright, his small hands clutching the drawing under the table, his eyes looking around with curiosity. In his heart, tonight was the chance to prove to Grandma that he was part of this family. The food was still hot, roast beef, mashed potatoes, salad, but no one touched their chopsticks. Margaret had just thrown out the words, "Some people carry baggage," and the atmosphere had collapsed. Emma still sat upright, trying not to show her hurt. But in her mind, memories flooded back. Her ex-husband once scolded her for being a failed woman. The neighbors once looked at her and Noah with pity. Now old wounds were reopened by Margaret with just one sentence. Luke wanted to argue, wanted to protect Emma, but in his throat the words were stuck. He heard his father's voice in his head. "Family is honor. Don't embarrass your mother." The shadow of his dead father still weighed heavily, and he could only squeeze Emma's hand under the table, like a silent apology. That heavy atmosphere made Noah even more restless. The boy glanced at the glass of orange juice placed a little further away. In his mind, he only thought, if I get the juice myself, if I act good, maybe Grandma will like me more. He reached out, his small hand trembling. Emma was looking down, unable to stop it. The glass of water slipped from Noah's hand, spilling onto the white towel, spreading a bright orange streak. The sound was small, but in the quiet room it was as loud as thunder. "Noah," Emma exclaimed, quickly pulling out a napkin to wipe her son. "I'm sorry," the boy mumbled, his eyes filled with tears, looking around in panic. The guests were bustling, some people laughed awkwardly, some people bowed down and pretended to eat to avoid tension. Margaret reached out, snatching the napkin from Emma's hand. The decisive movement seemed to cut off the mother's protection. She wiped the table, her voice cold as she said, "This is why children should know their place." The whole table fell silent. The surrounding sounds disappeared, leaving only that sentence echoing. Emma was stunned, her eyes wide open. Her heart tightened as if someone was squeezing it. She looked at her son, seeing his face change color. Noah bowed his head, his small shoulders shaking. Tears welled up, but he tried to hold them back, his lips pressed tightly together. For a child, that sentence is not just a scolding. It is a sentence, a mark deeply engraved in the young soul. "I do not belong here." Emma turned to Luke, waiting for him to speak. But Luke could only utter a weak word. "Mom," he stopped, his voice choked in his throat. The shadow of his father, the pressure of filial piety, tied him to silence. Emma wanted to scream, wanted to protect her child, but amidst the gazes focused on her, she chose to hold Noah close to her chest. "It's okay, baby, Mommy's here." No one said anything more. The whole table fell into a thick silence. The dishes gradually cooled, the flavors fading. Aunt May looked at Emma, her eyes filled with sympathy but also helplessness. Emma sat there, her heart pounding. She knew that tonight had only just begun. Margaret had not only attacked her but also attacked Noah. And in that moment, Emma realized this battle was no longer between her and her mother-in-law. It was a battle to protect her son from rejection. After Margaret's knife-like words, the meal fell into silence. The roast meat on the table grew cold, the salad withered on the plate, but no one touched it. No one had the strength to say polite words. Everyone understood an invisible line had been drawn and Emma and Noah had been pushed to the other side. Noah sat still, his small shoulders hunched. He didn't dare look at anyone. His small hands gripped the napkin tightly, crumpling it until it was wrinkled. Emma hugged her child close to her chest, trying to protect him, but her heart ached. A mother's heart ached so much that it suffocated. Luke saw that scene, his heart felt like it was torn in two. On one side was his mother, the woman who raised him, the person he once believed was a solid support. On the other side were Emma and Noah, the family he wanted to build. But the moment his mother said that, he could only keep silent. And it was that silence that betrayed Emma. The dinner ended in a gloomy atmosphere. The guests made excuses to leave early, avoiding the tense gaze between mother-in-law and daughter-in-law. Aunt May was the last one to stay. Before leaving, she gently held Emma's hand, whispering, "Don't let my words hurt you. There are wounds from her past, not yours." Emma smiled awkwardly, thanked him, but her heart was empty. Night fell. In the small apartment, Emma sat by the bed, looking at Noah, who was fast asleep, his eyes swollen from crying. She reached out to stroke his hair, her heart aching. Was it a mistake to drag him into this marriage? The tormenting question repeated over and over. Emma knew that loving Luke was one thing, but forcing Noah to bear Margaret's hateful gaze was another. Emma sat there for a long time, the yellow light of the nightlight shining on her haggard face. She remembered her old marriage, the nights she cried alone when she was betrayed, the times she tried to mend a rotten relationship. She swore that if she had another chance, she would choose differently. But now, looking at her son sleeping with wet eyelashes, she feared that she was making the same mistake again. At the same time, in the study at home, Luke sat alone. The wine bottle was half empty, the glass on the table unfinished. He ruffled his hair, his eyes red. The image of Emma holding Noah kept appearing in his mind. He remembered her disappointed eyes, eyes that seemed to say, "Why didn't you stand up for us?" Luke knew he had failed, but he also knew that arguing with his mother in front of all his relatives was like adding fuel to the fire. He told himself, tomorrow at the wedding, things would be different. He would stand up to protect Emma, to protect Noah. But in his heart, he wasn't sure he had the strength. In her own room, Margaret sat at her dressing table. Her pearl necklace shone under the light. She looked in the mirror and saw a strong, proud woman. But in her eyes, that pride hid an old wound that had never healed. Many years ago, she had been betrayed. Her husband, the man the whole neighborhood admired, had had an affair. Margaret remembered clearly the day she found out, the feeling of humiliation, the feeling of her honor being trampled. From then on, she vowed never to let an imperfect woman step into this family. To her, Emma was not just Emma. Emma was the embodiment of the person who had destroyed her happiness in the past. Margaret took a deep breath and whispered to herself, "I did this to protect my family. Luke will thank me later." That night, the three of them, Emma, Luke, Margaret, lay awake in different rooms. Each of them held a pain, a memory, a fear. Emma was afraid of losing her fragile happiness. Luke was afraid of having to choose between love and filial piety. Margaret was afraid that the stain of the past would come back to haunt her family. The sky outside was still calm, but in this house a storm had begun to form, and when the sun rose it would explode right at the wedding. The next morning, the house was busy preparing for the wedding. People arranged flowers, set up the welcome gate, checked the sound. But behind the hustle and bustle, the atmosphere was still heavy. Emma sat in the bridal chamber, her face haggard from not sleeping all night. In front of the mirror, she tried to smile, but the smile was forced, her eyes showing dark circles. She told herself, just get through today, everything will be fine. Luke and I will have a life for ourselves. But deep down, she knew Margaret would not let go easily. Noah ran in, holding a small tie in his hand. "Mom, can I wear this? I want to look like Luke." Emma forced a smile, nodded, "Of course, honey, you'll be the most handsome boy today." But when she stroked her son's hair, she saw that Noah was no longer as eager as yesterday. There was something timid and fearful in his eyes. In the next room, Margaret chatted with a few old friends who had come to attend. A light lunch was served to the closest relatives before the main ceremony. The family sat around the table, trying to maintain a normal appearance, but everyone knew the mood was the atmosphere was fragile. Aunt May, a kind woman with warm eyes but often said the wrong thing, raised her glass and smiled awkwardly. "To Emma and Luke, may your love be strong enough to heal old wounds." The whole table clinked glasses, but the phrase "old wounds" made many people frown. Margaret still sat upright, not reacting, only taking a sip of wine. Aunt May sighed, her voice as if talking to herself. She wasn't always like this, not before the affair. The space froze. The knives and forks stopped. Emma raised her head, her eyes wide open. Luke looked at her as if he wanted to stop her. "An affair?" Emma repeated in her head, her heart pounding. She turned to Luke, but he avoided her eyes. Margaret put down her glass, her face unchanged, as if she didn't hear. But her hands were clenched so tightly that her fingers turned white. No one said anything more. Aunt May realized she had said the wrong thing and quickly smiled awkwardly. "Oh, I talk too much, forget it." But the words had planted a seed of doubt on the table. Emma sat still, but in her mind a series of questions arose. What affair? Was this why Margaret hated her so much? Luke bowed his head, his heart pounding. He remembered the times his parents had argued when he was a child. The sound of broken objects, the sound of his mother sobbing, the sound of his father pleading. He had never understood what had happened. And now, Aunt May had revealed a piece of the truth. Margaret was still sitting, her face cold as ice. But deep in her eyes, a storm was raging. Emma took a deep breath, telling herself, I have to know, I have to understand what had turned Margaret into my enemy. But she also knew that this secret would not be easily admitted. The meal ended quickly, no one mentioned the word affair again. But the word was like a ghost, hanging in the air, haunting each person. As the afternoon wore on, the guests began to arrive. Music played, flowers fell from the canopy. Everyone tried to appear cheerful, but the aftershocks of those words had not yet subsided. Emma adjusted her wedding dress, her eyes blazing with determination. No matter how much Margaret hated her, she would still walk down this aisle today. And she would not let Noah think he did not belong here. While Emma was busy adjusting her wedding dress backstage, Noah wandered around the hallway, his eyes curiously looking at the flowers and guests. He stopped at the half-closed door. Inside was Margaret's familiar voice. Her voice was cold, deep, and loud enough to penetrate the crack in the door. That boy will never belong here. He's not one of us, and he never will be. Noah paused. The boy did not fully understand the meaning of the words belong, not one of us. But each syllable hit his young heart. His small hands tightly grasped the tiny tie that Emma had just prepared for him. In his head there was only one thought. If Grandma hates me, then everyone here will hate me. The soft laughter of a guest inside made him feel as if those words were agreed upon by the whole world. Noah's eyes blurred. He turned and ran away, his little heart pounding, feeling as if the entire glittering hall outside had no place for him. He found a tree in the garden, crouched down, hugging his knees, trying to hide himself from the music and laughter still echoing in the distance. The boy didn't know what to do. He only felt one thing: he didn't belong here. The music of the ceremony rang out in the distance, each piano note lingering in the air. The guests had settled down, everyone waiting for the moment the bride appeared. But backstage, Emma panicked. Noah disappeared. The small tie the boy had intended to wear was left on the chair, left behind as a sign of rejection. Emma ran down the hallway, her white dress sweeping the floor, her heart pounding. Noah, where are you? The call echoed, but there was no response. She stopped, gasping for breath, her mind spinning. In just a few minutes, the MC would introduce her and Luke's names. Everyone was waiting. But how could she walk up the aisle when she didn't know where her child was? Luke found Emma in the hallway, his eyes worried. He's gone, Emma said, her voice trembling. Luke grabbed her shoulder. We'll find him, he can't be far. They split up to search. Emma ran to the back garden where she had seen Noah playing. The leaves rustled, the sunset dyed red. Finally, under the big tree, Emma saw her son sitting huddled, hugging his knees, his face down. Noah, she called softly, her voice choked. The boy looked up. His eyes were red, his face sad. Not like a child about to attend a happy day. She said, I will never belong here. Emma was stunned. Margaret's words had penetrated her child's heart. She knelt down, hugging Noah tightly. You belong with me always, with Luke too. This is your family. But Noah shook his head, tears rolling down. If Grandma hates me, then everyone will. Emma hugged her son tighter, her heart breaking. She knew that Margaret would not only ruin tonight, she was destroying a child's belief in love and acceptance. Luke arrived, panting from running, seeing Noah crying. He sat down and put his arms around both mother and son. Hey buddy, don't listen to her, you're my son now too, nothing can change that. Noah looked up, his eyes filled with tears. Really? Really, Luke said firmly. But a fear rose in his heart. Would he have the strength to stand up to his mother if she was determined to destroy this happiness? Emma wiped away her son's tears. We have to go back, they're waiting. The three of them held hands and walked back to the banquet hall. But in Emma's mind, a determination was burning. No matter what Margaret did, she would not let her son believe he didn't belong here. Back in the hall, the lights were bright, and the guests turned to look at them. No one knew what had just happened outside, but Emma could see Margaret's eyes from the back of the room, cold, searching, as if she knew she had planted the seeds that had led Noah to flee. And there was no remorse in those eyes. The music was playing, the violins were singing long notes that stretched the air. The hall was sparkling with white ribbons, peonies were blooming on every table, the light from the crystal chandeliers reflected like thousands of tiny stars. It was all arranged to say one thing: this was a wedding to remember. But to Emma, every step in that scene was like walking into a courtroom, where hundreds of eyes were ready to judge her. Margaret sat in the front row, her posture straight, her shoulders high, her face calm. She was the embodiment of control, no need to shout, just a few hints were enough to change the whole room. A middle-aged woman leaned into her ear. "She looks pretty, doesn't she?" Margaret sipped her wine, her lips pursed slightly. "Pretty, yes, but second marriages are always complicated." Another guest whispered, "And the boy, he's not Luke's, right?" Margaret tilted her head, a faint smile on her face. "Children from another marriage rarely fit in." The words were not loud, but they were enough to reach the ears of those sitting nearby and quickly spread like ink stains. Within minutes, the entire hall was whispering. Emma walked in with Luke and Noah, the white bouquet in her hand shaking. She could clearly feel every eye on her. On her, not the admiring gaze of a wedding guest, but a gaze of scrutiny, pity, even contempt. "They're staring," Emma whispered, her heart racing. Luke squeezed her hand, whispering, "Ignore them. Just look at me." But in his eyes, worry was still evident. Noah tugged at his mother's skirt, looked up and asked softly, "Mom, why are they whispering?" Emma tried to smile, bent down to hug her son. "It doesn't matter, we're together." But deep down, she knew it wouldn't be easy. The murmurs grew louder. A guest leaned close to the ear of the person next to her. "Is it true she was divorced? The boy doesn't look like Luke at all." Margaret must be furious. Each whisper was like an arrow piercing Emma's back. She remembered the days in the old neighborhood when the divorce had just happened. The neighbors gossiped behind her back, eyes full of pity and disdain for her and her child. She had thought that when she entered a new beginning, the past would stay behind. But now it was alive again, right on her big day. Emma took a deep breath, but her hands were still shaking. Just get through this wedding, just walk up the aisle, everything would be fine, she told herself. But the fear in her heart kept pounding, each beat like a hammer of judgment. Meanwhile, Margaret continued to sow poisonous drops into the guests' ears. A man asked, "She seems decent enough, doesn't she?" Margaret put down her glass, her eyes cold. Appearances deceive. People make choices, and some mistakes are harder to hide. The guests nodded, not asking any more questions, but their eyes had changed. She didn't need to say it out loud. She just needed to sow doubt. And suspicion, like a fire in dry grass, spread quickly throughout the hall. Emma looked around, noticing the change in the atmosphere. An older woman shook her head slightly, whispering to her husband. A young man smiled awkwardly when his eyes met Emma's, then immediately looked away. Every little action, every glance was enough to make Emma feel as if she were standing naked before the crowd. She turned to Luke, her eyes brimming with tears. "They hate me already." Luke took her hand, squeezed it tightly. "They don't matter, we matter." But in his heart he knew that the consolation was as fragile as paper. In the back row, Aunt May observed everything. She saw Emma biting her lip until it bled, saw Noah sitting huddled next to his mother, saw Luke brace himself to endure. And she saw clearly that Margaret was manipulating public opinion, her every insinuation like a rope, turning the wedding into a trial. Aunt May took a sip of wine, her hand shaking slightly. Anger rose in her heart. Enough was enough. The master of ceremonies stepped onto the stage, his voice booming. "Ladies and gentlemen, please be seated. The ceremony will begin shortly." The guests sat down one by one, chairs shifting, dresses rustling. But the tension did not lessen, on the contrary, it was stifling. Emma sat down, clutching the bouquet, her heart feeling as if someone was squeezing it. Noah looked up at his mother, worried. "Mom, what if Grandma doesn't clap for us?" Emma choked, kneeling down to her son's level. "It doesn't matter who claps, baby, we clap for each other." Noah nodded slightly, but his eyes were still sad. Margaret watched the scene from afar, her lips pressed tightly together. A flash of sympathy flashed, but was quickly drowned out by contempt. In her eyes, Emma was only acting pity. "No," she told herself, "I won't let this happen. Not under my roof, not under my name." Aunt May watched the scene, her heart aching. She slammed her wine glass down on the table and stood up. The sound of chairs being scraped away echoed in the silence, causing everyone to turn around. She took a deep breath, her voice trembling but firm. She wasn't always like this, not before the affair. Aunt May's words rang out, sharp as a knife. She wasn't always like this, not before the affair. The air in the hall seemed to have been sucked dry. The ceiling fans were spinning steadily overhead, but no one could hear them anymore. Knives and forks stopped, half-smiles died on their lips. A few guests tilted their heads and asked softly, "The affair? What affair?" The whispers spread like ripples. Emma looked up, her eyes wide. She felt her ears ringing, but the three words "the affair" kept resounding like a drum. Luke stood beside her, his face tense, his hands clenched until they were white. He was no longer the calm groom in a neat suit, but the boy from years ago, listening to his parents arguing behind the door. Margaret jumped up, her face red with anger. "That's enough, May." Her voice boomed, startling several guests, but Aunt May did not sit down. Her hands were shaking, but her eyes were determined. "They deserve to know, Margaret. Luke deserves to know why you fight so hard against his happiness." Emma turned to Luke and whispered, "What is she talking about?" But Luke avoided her eyes and remained silent. Margaret bit her lip, her voice as sharp as a knife. "This is none of your business. Today is not about me." But Aunt May, shaking her head, her eyes filled with sorrow. "But it is, because you've turned this day into a battlefield, because you've punished Emma for something she never did. You're punishing her for what your husband did." A loud gasp rang out in the crowd, followed by a series of whispers. Emma was stunned, her heart pounding. She felt as if the ground was shaking. "Your husband?" she choked out. Luke closed his eyes, memories flooding back. He heard his mother sobbing in the middle of the night, his father begging for forgiveness, the sound of broken glasses. That year he was young, didn't understand, only saw the warm house become cold. Now all the pieces fit together. Margaret trembled, her hands gripping the chair so tightly that her knuckles turned white. She looked around, hundreds of eyes were on her, curious, pitying, judging. She couldn't bear it. "Yes," she shouted, her voice breaking. "He betrayed me, he broke this family, and I will never, never allow a woman like her," she pointed at Emma, her eyes blazing with hatred, "to bring that shame back into my house." The hall fell silent. Some of the guests gasped, some bowed their heads, ashamed of the sight. Emma was stunned. Her mind was blank. The bouquet fell from her hands, the white petals shattering on the tile floor. She took a step back, feeling as if she had just been convicted of a crime that was not hers. "I'm not him," she whispered, her voice cracking, but no one heard her clearly. Luke took a step forward, putting himself between his mother and Emma. "This isn't about Dad anymore. This is about me, about the family I choose." Margaret laughed coldly, her voice harsh. "No, this is about protecting you from making the same mistake, from binding yourself to someone who will only hurt you. Like he hurt me." Luke shook his head, tears welling in his eyes. "Emma is not Dad, she is not the past, she is my future." The whispers rose again. A young guest whispered, "So that's why she hates Emma." Another woman shook her head, "But blaming the bride in front of everyone?" Aunt May's voice was teary, small but clear. "Margaret, don't you see? By fighting so hard, you've become the very thing you fear. You're hurting Luke, you're hurting that child." Emma bent down and saw Noah trembling. His eyes were filled with tears, looking around in confusion. The 7-year-old didn't fully understand what affair was, but he understood one thing: his grandmother had just called his mother an embarrassment. Emma hugged her son tightly, her heart breaking. She wanted to scream that she wasn't a destroyer, that she had never betrayed anyone, but her throat was choked. Margaret watched, her heart aching for a moment, a flash of sympathy, but it was immediately drowned in hatred. She turned away, her voice cold. "He does not belong, and neither do you." Emma burst into tears, tears falling down Noah's cheeks. Luke clenched his fists, his whole body shaking. This was no longer a story about mother and wife, this was a wound of 30 years being torn open in the middle of a wedding. The hall was silent, but the silence was heavier than any noise. Margaret's gasping breaths, Noah's sobs, Emma's pounding heart, all of it blended into a dark music. Emma raised her head, her eyes filled with tears but shining with determination. "I am not her past, and I will not let my son believe that he is a stain." She stood in the middle of the aisle, the white flowers shaking in her hands. She felt each petal falling like a fragment of her own belief. Margaret stood in the front row, panting, her eyes blazing, her whole body like a volcano about to erupt. Aunt May sat down quietly, but her eyes were still on Luke, as if urging him to do the right thing. Luke took a step forward, standing between Emma and Margaret. He looked at his mother, then at the woman he loved. In all his life, he had never felt so torn apart. "Mom," his voice was hoarse, "this is my wedding, please." "Your wedding?" Margaret interrupted, her voice like a whip. "This is not a wedding. This is a mistake. You are about to chain yourself to her baggage, to her shame, to her son who is not even yours." Murmurs arose in the crowd again. Some guests covered their mouths, others looked at Emma with a mixture of pity and judgment. Emma was stunned. The words not only attacked her, but also Noah the child was clinging to his mother's hand, his eyes filled with tears. Emma knelt down, holding her child close to her chest, whispering, "Don't listen, you belong with me always." Noah sobbed, then suddenly shouted, "Stop, stop hurting my mom." The child's clear scream echoed throughout the room, penetrating the thick walls of prejudice. The entire hall fell silent. There was no more whispering, no more moving chairs. There was only Margaret's gasping breaths, Noah's sobs, and the heavy silence of hundreds of witnesses. Luke turned to his mother, his eyes flaming. "This has to end." Emma looked at Luke, her eyes filled with faith but also trembling. She knew this was the moment that would decide everything. The host tried to regain control, his voice shaking. "We will now hear the vows." Luke raised his hand to stop her, turning to Margaret. The whole room held its breath. "Mom," he began, his voice both shaking and firm, "if I have to choose." The screen went dark. The music pounded, then stopped. The air in the hall was thick, heavy as if no one could breathe. The violin that had led the wedding had long since stopped, but its echo still hung in everyone's minds like a tight string about to snap. All eyes were on the center of the altar, where Luke stood, a man caught between two worlds. One was his mother, the other was the woman he loved, and the child trembling in her arms. Emma held Noah close to her chest, tears streaming down her cheeks. A single question echoed in her mind: will he choose me, or will this be the moment I lose everything? Margaret stood up straight, her face tense, her eyes blazing like two fierce fires. She said nothing, just stared at Luke, her gaze full of authority, like a whip-wielding horse waiting for an obedient bow. The hall was dead silent. A guest in the back row swallowed, the small sound echoing eerily. Some people tilted their heads, not daring to breathe, as if they were witnessing a scene that did not belong to a wedding but a public trial. Luke took a deep breath, his shoulders shaking slightly. His voice was choked but determined. "If I have to choose..." Margaret was still speaking when she interrupted. Her voice was as mournful as a long funeral bell. "Choose wisely, because once you say the words, Luke, there will be no going back." The sound was like a knife cutting across, tearing the wedding atmosphere apart. The guests began to murmur, some exchanged worried glances, some shook their heads as if they had just witnessed an irreparable mistake. Emma looked at Luke, her eyes wet. In her heart, a part of her hope flared up, but another part trembled with fear. If he chose Mom, what would I do? If he gave up, where would Noah and I go? Noah clung to his mother's neck, his voice innocent but heartbreaking. "Mom, are we leaving?" Emma held her son close to her chest, her heart breaking into 1,000 pieces. Luke looked at Emma, then at Noah. The boy's face was streaked with tears, trembling in his mother's arms. The image stabbed straight into his heart. He remembered his childhood days shrouded in silence when his parents were in a cold war. He remembered his mother's sobs behind the door, the feeling of loneliness when she was left alone in the big, cold house. And now, he saw that same feeling etched deep into the face of this 7-year-old child. "No, I won't let history repeat itself." Luke turned to look at his mother. His voice was loud, sparkling with a determination he had never had in his life. "You taught me loyalty, Mom. You taught me to protect family. But family is not built by fear. Family is built by love." Margaret pursed her lips, her eyes blazing with anger. She emphasized each word as if spitting straight into his face. "Love, love is what blinded me, what destroyed this family once. And now you want to bring it here again?" The murmur in the hall grew louder. A woman whispered, "This is no wedding, this is war." A man sighed, "Poor boy, he's being torn apart." Emma heard everything. Each whisper was like a new knife stabbing into her heart. She wanted to run away from this place, to disappear with Noah so that no one would point at her. But her legs were like stone, unable to move. Luke reached out to take Emma's cold hand. He squeezed it tightly, transmitting a silent strength. Then he bent down, placing his hand on Noah's shoulder. His voice echoed throughout the hall, so strong that it drowned out everything else. "Mom, if I have to choose, I choose them." The space exploded. Some guests gasped, some covered their mouths. The whispers surged like waves. Emma was stunned, tears streaming down her face, but this time not from pain, but from the feeling of being protected, of being seen. Noah rubbed his eyes, mumbling as if he couldn't believe it. "Really, Luke?" Luke smiled shakily, nodding. "Really?" Margaret took a step back as if someone had slapped her in the face. Her eyes widened, her fiery gaze turning into a raging storm. You betrayed me." Her voice broke, trembling like broken glass. "First your father, now you, my own son." The guests fell silent. That sentence exposed Margaret's deepest wound, and the pain spilled out, turning into blind resentment. Emma hugged Noah, but for the first time in days, she felt like she wasn't alone. The room seemed to explode after Luke's declaration. "I choose them." The whispers exploded, overlapping like a chaotic chorus. A few guests clapped sporadically as if in support, but most just looked at each other, shaking their heads, their faces heavy as if they had just witnessed a family burn themselves in the flames of hatred. Margaret froze, her eyes wide, her lips trembling. She took a step back, her hands gripping the arms of her chair, but not out of weakness, but out of rage. "You dare," she hissed, her voice coming from the depths of an abyss. "You dare choose them over me, your own mother." Luke did not back away, his eyes bloodshot. "Yes, because this." He reached out to hug Emma and Noah close to him. "This is my family now." The words fell like a hammer, shaking the room. Margaret laughed, a hollow, cold laugh that echoed off the walls. "Family, you call that family? A divorced woman and another man's child." A few "oh my God"s rang out from the back row. A woman covered her mouth, and a few others looked away in embarrassment. Emma paled, her hands shaking as she held Noah tighter, as if afraid Margaret would snatch him from her. Noah snuggled into his mother's chest, his eyes wet. His voice was as small as the wind, but it carried farther than any murmur. "Mom, are we still a family?" Emma choked, holding her son close to her chest. The innocent question tore at her heart. Only a child would ask that, when she had heard so many times that she didn't belong here. She looked up, looking directly at Margaret for the first time. A hard light flashed in her tear-filled eyes. "Yes, Noah, we are a family, and nothing she says can change that." Margaret took a step forward, her shoes clicking on the floor like a gavel. "You dare talk back to me in my own house on my son's wedding?" Luke stood in front of Emma, his voice roaring. "Stop, Mom. This isn't your house anymore. This is our wedding, not your battlefield." A bravo rang out from the back of the room. Someone among the guests couldn't help but cheer. A few others started clapping, but quickly fell silent as Margaret swept her sharp gaze towards them. The atmosphere became chaotic. A few guests stood up, their chairs creaking. Some whispered, "This is scandalous." Others shook their heads, "Poor Emma, poor boy." Emma stood in the storm of sound, feeling as if she had been stripped naked, hundreds of eyes burning into her flesh. She trembled, her heart pounding. In that moment she thought, maybe I should run away, maybe this happiness is not for me. But then Noah looked up, his eyes were red but bright. He whispered like a prayer, "Don't leave, Mom, please don't leave." That sentence was like an anchor pulling Emma back. She bent down, pressed her forehead against her son's, and whispered, "I won't, not this time." Aunt May stood up now. The wine glass on the table fell, spilling red like blood. Her voice echoed above the noise. "Enough!" The whole hall fell silent. All eyes turned to the woman who had sat silently for too long. Aunt May stepped forward, her eyes wet but bright. "Margaret, stop this madness. You're not protecting Luke, you're destroying him, and you're destroying yourself." Margaret turned around, her eyes flashing. "You don't understand, you never understood." Aunt May trembled, but her voice was steady. "Maybe I didn't. But I know one thing, punishing Emma and that boy won't heal your wounds. It will only pass the pain to another generation." Emma looked at Aunt May, tears welling up in her eyes. A new strength was born inside her, not the strength to fight back with harsh words, but to stand firm to protect her child. Luke squeezed Emma's hand, his eyes shining with faith. "I won't let go, not now, not ever." The guests were silent. Some nodded silently, some wiped away tears. But the atmosphere was still heavy because Margaret, still standing there, trembling, her eyes bloodshot like a cornered animal. Silence fell after Aunt May's words. Everyone looked at Margaret, the woman still standing straight but her hands were shaking, her lips pressed tightly together as if she were struggling fiercely with herself. In her eyes, anger was boiling, but deep inside was bleeding pain, an old wound exposed in front of hundreds of people. She turned to Luke, her voice choked, but each word fell like a sword. "So this is it. You betrayed me like he did." Luke took a step forward, standing completely in front of Emma and Noah. His voice trembled slightly, but he was determined. "I'm not betraying you, Mom. I'm choosing love. I'm choosing not to repeat the mistakes of silence and fear." Margaret laughed bitterly, a bitter laugh that echoed throughout the room. She pointed straight at Emma, her eyes flashing. "And this is what you call love? She will ruin you, Luke, just like your father ruined me." Emma hugged Noah tighter. In that moment, she felt the eyes of the entire hall on her, as if she was the cause of it all. But then something strange happened. Margaret's words no longer stabbed her like before. It sounded like a hollow echo, the voice of a woman swallowed up by the past. Margaret gasped as if all her strength had been used up. She turned and walked away, her heels clicking loudly on the wooden floor, each click like a hammer slamming a door shut. She said firmly, her voice hard as steel, "From this day forward, you are no son of mine." Her footsteps echoed through the hall until the door behind her slammed shut. A moment of deadly silence fell, then a murmur of voices broke out. "She disowned him. Unbelievable. Poor Woma, and she's broken." Emma stood rooted to the spot, her eyes blurred with tears. The bouquet fell from her hands, the petals scattered on the floor like traces of a broken dream. But then she felt a hand grasp hers tightly. "Luke." He turned, his eyes determined, his voice loud but gentle. "She may walk away, but I'm still here with you, with Noah." Emma choked, tears falling freely. Not a word came out, but her eyes shone with endless gratitude. Noah looked up at Luke, his eyes still red and swollen, whispering, "So we're still a family." Luke bent down slightly, hugging the boy to his chest. "Yes, buddy, we're a family. No one can take that from us." The hall held its breath. Then, from a distant corner, a burst of applause broke out, faint but clear. Then another and another. The applause spread timidly at first, then more forcefully. Many guests smiled, a few wiped away tears. Some still shook their heads, not quite understanding, but the atmosphere had changed, from chaos to witnessing something truly sacred. Aunt May stepped forward, placing her hand gently on Emma's shoulder. Her voice was warm but solemn. "You stood strong, dear. That's what matters. But remember this, anger can burn a bridge, forgiveness can rebuild it. Don't let hatred be the only legacy." Emma nodded, tears welling up again. Her heart was still scarred, but in Aunt May's words, she heard a new path, a path of healing, not hatred. Luke squeezed Emma's hand, and the three of them turned to face the guests. No need for an MC, no need for elaborate rituals. They just stood there, hand in hand, trembling but resilient, a small family that had just weathered a storm. In the back row, a few guests quietly wiped away tears. A middle-aged man whispered to his wife, "That's real love, not flowers, not chandeliers, just the choice to stand together." Emma heard those words, and for the first time that day she felt a warm feeling in her heart. The wedding might have been broken, but it was from those broken pieces that true love was forged. After Margaret left, the hall gradually became quiet again. The guests stood up one by one. Some came to shake Luke's hand, congratulate Emma. Others whispered in her ear, "You're strong," or "Good luck." A few hesitant just nodded, then turned away. But Emma didn't care. In that moment she realized the most important thing was not what they thought, but who had stayed by her side. The MC, her voice still trembling but trying to maintain order, said, "Let us honor the vow they have chosen themselves." No more elaborate vows, no rings exchanged in front of hundreds of people. Emma and Luke simply held hands, placing Noah between them. They looked at each other, their eyes shining with a silent commitment. "We chose each other despite everything." The applause rang out again, this time more firmly, more warmly. In that applause, Emma felt protected, not by society, but by the choice of the three of them. When the guests left, the hall gradually emptied. Emma took off her high heels and sat down on a chair in the preparation room. The white wedding dress was now wrinkled, stained with tears. No longer as gorgeous as before, but she did not feel sorry. Luke sat down next to her, reached out to stroke her hair. He whispered, "I'm sorry for everything." Emma shook her head, smiling through her tears. "No, you chose us, that's all I needed." Noah ran over, hugging them both tightly, his eyes sparkling. "Now we're really a family." The three of them hugged each other in a small room without fresh flowers, without crystal lights, but enough to dispel all the darkness they had just experienced. At the same time, in the quiet house, Margaret sat alone. The living room was so quiet that she could hear the clock ticking. She placed her hand on the photo frame with her husband years ago. He smiled gently. She was young, her eyes were full of hope. A tear rolled down, falling on the cold glass. "Why did you do this to me?" She whispered to the photo, but knew that question would never be answered. Deep down, Margaret did not hate Emma. She hated the wound that had never healed, hated the feeling of betrayal that still haunted her. And in the lonely night, she realized for the first time, perhaps she with her unceasing pain had pushed her son away. She buried her head in the photo frame, sobbing no longer a bitter laugh, but the real cry of a woman imprisoned by the past. The next morning, the sun flooded the city. Emma opened the door to her small apartment. Noah rushed out, his clear laughter echoing. Luke followed, holding Emma's hand. They did not know what the future would hold, whether Margaret would come back or not, whether their family would truly accept them or not, but they knew one thing. They had chosen each other, and that was the starting point of all happiness. Emma took a deep breath, feeling the warm sun on her face. In her heart echoed a lesson that she herself had learned life has taught. Happiness does not come from the gravit, the perfect wedding. Happiness comes from having the courage to stand by each other, even when the world is against them. Luke wrapped his arms around her shoulders. "Ready?" Emma nodded, smiling. "Ready?" Noah turned around, calling cheerfully, "Come on, we're a family now." The three of them walked hand in hand toward the bright light.